So this is lesson 5.2b and it begins on page 25. So everybody needs to have their module 5 open to page 25, have your pencil ready, and we will begin. 5.2b lesson begins with a review of the coordinate plane. So we're just going to read through the information that comes first and fill in some of the blanks together. So it starts off with the sentence, a coordinate plane is formed by the intersection of two number lines. So we want to fill in a coordinate plane is formed when two number lines intersect. An ordered pair gives the coordinates, which is the location of a point. So the next couple of blanks we're filling in with an ordered pair. The first number inside the parentheses is the x-coordinate, and the second number in the parentheses is the y-coordinate. For example, the ordered pair 2, 3, 2 is the x-coordinate in that ordered pair, and 3 is the y-coordinate. The x-coordinate tells you how many units to move horizontally, so that means how many units we're moving left or right. And the y-coordinate, the second number, tells us how many units to move vertically, so that means up or down. And of course, whether we move left or right on the x-axis depends on whether that x-coordinate is negative or positive, and whether we move up or down on the y-axis tells us whether is dependent on whether the y-coordinate is positive or negative. The x-axis is known as the horizontal line or the horizontal axis, and the y-axis is known as the vertical axis. And we will be labeling a coordinate plane shortly, so we'll look at that a little further. The intersection of the x and y coordinate is called the origin. So actually that sentence would be better if it read the intersection of the x and y axes is called the origin. So where the two number lines intersect is called the origin, and that ordered pair is 0, 0. When something is linear, we say that it is a straight line. So linear is defined as a line, and we'll see that come up in the first few examples in this lesson. And the last blank to fill in, the x and y axis divide the coordinate plane into 4 quadrants. And if we take a look at the coordinate plane right down below, we can see that these quadrants have been labeled starting in the top right corner with quadrant 1, and then moving in a counterclockwise direction, so quadrant 2 in the top left corner, quadrant 3 in the bottom left corner, and quadrant 4 in the bottom right corner. Notice that the quadrants are labeled using Roman numerals, and that is traditional. Also notice that they have labeled the x-axis as the horizontal axis, and notice that they have labeled the y-axis as the vertical axis. If we look a little more closely at the x-axis, we can see that the positive numbers are to the right of the origin and the negatives are to the left of the origin, as would be expected on a number line. And we can see that on the y-axis, the vertical, the positive numbers are above the origin and the negative numbers are below the origin. So now we get some practice with locating and graphing some ordered pairs. And the first question they ask us is, what are the x and y coordinates of point A and B? So eventually we will be writing the ordered pair for points A and B. If I begin at the origin, which remember is where the two axes intersect, and of course our x-axis horizontal and our y-axis vertical. So again, if we go back to the origin, and if I make my way to point A, I first move on the x-axis. So I'm going to have to move to the right, and that's going to be 1, 2, 3 spaces or 3 units to the right. And because it's 3 units to the right, that x-coordinate would be positive 3. From positive 3 on the x-axis, I would need to go up 2 units to put me at point A, and because I went up 2 units on the y-axis, that would be a positive 2. So the ordered pair that shows the location of point A is going to be 3, 2, the x-coordinate and then the y-coordinate. If we repeat that for point B, I notice that point B is over in quadrant 2. So I'm going to go back to the origin, and to get to point B, the first thing I'll have to do is move on the x-axis -1, -2 units left. So the x-coordinate will be -2, 2 units to the left. And from -2 on the x-axis, I would have to move up 1, 2, 3. So positive 3 on the y-axis, my y-coordinate is a positive 3. So the ordered pair that shows the location of point B is -2, 3. Now they ask us to describe in words how to plot the point 2, 4 on the coordinate plane above. So if we were going to graph this point, and we actually can, I would begin at the origin, and because the x-coordinate is positive 2, that means I'm going to move 2 units to the right. The y-coordinate is positive 4, so from 2 on the x-axis, I will now move up 4 units on the y-axis, so up 1, 2, 3, 4, and that is where 2, 4 would be located. So now if we describe that in words, we always want to make sure we are clear that we start from the origin. So from the origin, which remember has the ordered pair 0, 0, we first move 2 units to the right. And we can clarify that that is on the horizontal x-axis. Then 4 units up, and we can clarify that that is on the vertical y-axis. And of course, that is our endpoint. That is where we graph the point in the coordinate plane. And it just so happens that that point ends up in quadrant 1. Okay, the next thing they want us to do is graph a few more points on that coordinate plane, and because they give us the name of those points, we can label them once we graph them. So we'll start with point T, which is at 1, -2. So from the origin, I'm going to go right 1 on the x-axis and then down 2 on the y-axis. And so point T is in quadrant 4. Next is point U at -3, -2. So back to the origin, -3 is left 3 on the x-axis and down 2 on the y-axis. And so that would be point U in quadrant 3. Point V is at -3, +2. So back to the origin, we will move 3 to the left again. So 1, 2, 3 on the x-axis to the left, but then 2 units up. And so point V is located in quadrant 2. And the last point for us to graph is point W, and it's located at 1, 2. So back to the origin, x-coordinate is 1, so right 1, y-coordinate is 2, so we go up 2, and in quadrant 1 we have point W. All right, moving on to page 26. So the following table shows the relationship between the amount of cherries in pounds and the cost. And as I look at the table, I notice that for 1 pound of cherries, it's going to cost $1.50. So I'm just going to note that we've multiplied the 1 pound by $1.50 to get the cost. And if I move to the next column, I see that 2 pounds of cherries is $3. So again, we've multiplied 2 pounds times $1.50, which gives us a cost of $3. And I notice the same thing if I look at the next column. So 3 pounds of cherries times $1.50 would result in $4.50 for a total cost. And I can see that that pattern continues in the next two columns in the table. So when question A asks us if this is a proportional relationship, yes, it is. And how do we know? Because we're multiplying the amount, the pounds of cherries, by $1.50 each time to get the total cost. So we will answer yes, this is a proportional relationship, and then we'll note that you multiply the pounds of cherries by 1.50, so $1.50, to get the cost. Part B asks us, is the weight dependent on the cost, or is the cost dependent on the weight? So I think it's clear in this example that the cost that we're paying depends on how many pounds of cherries we purchase. So we will say that the cost is dependent on the weight. For example, if we buy 1 pound of cherries, we pay $1.50. If we buy 2 pounds of cherries, we pay $3. So again, that total cost depends on how many pounds of cherries we're purchasing. For part C, they want us to put the information from the table on the graph below, and they ask us to put the amount of cherries in pounds on the x-axis and the cost in dollars on the y-axis. And then if we can draw a straight line through the points, we will do that. So I noticed that they have not labeled the axes, so I'm going to go ahead and do that just for practice. The more we see it, the faster we'll learn it. So over here, our horizontal axis will label X, and up here, our vertical axis, we will label Y. Now I've scrolled and we can't see the table on the screen, but you can of course see it on your paper. So in the first column, we've got 1 pound of cherries for $1.50. So from the origin, I'm going to go over to 1 pound on the x-axis, and then I'm going to go up to $1.50 on the y-axis, and I'm going to put a point. Next in the table is 2 pounds for $3. So from the origin, I'm going to 2 pounds on the x-axis and up to 3 on the y-axis. And so I've got a point there to represent 2 pounds of cherries for $3. For 3 pounds of cherries on the x-axis, it's going to cost us $4.50. So we will put that point on our graph. From the origin, for 4 pounds of cherries, it will cost $6. And of course, from the table, 5 pounds of cherries will cost $7.50. And I am not quite prepared with a ruler, so I'm going to just sketch a straight line as best I can through these points. Oh dear. And I'm going to pause the video and restart because we have a time limit of 15 minutes. So stand by and we'll be right back.